Welcome on, welcome all to the Amateur's Guide to Shogi, and welcome back to the fifth game of the 2021 Oui Title Match between title holder Sota Fujii, playing here in this game as black, and the challenger Masayuki Toyoshima, playing in this game as white. This is, as I said, game 5. The current game score is 3-1 to Sota Fujii, which means that if he wins this game, he retains the title because it is best of 7 or first of 4, however you want to look at it. And as always, 8 hours on the clock, and I hope you all enjoy. So let's get started. As usual, they start off with a double static rook opening, just exactly the same as all of the other videos. I do a little bit more explaining about, sort of their setup in some of the other videos, but I'm just going to sort of speed through it in this one because, it's just a whole lot of the same, developing pieces, sort of tucking a king away. Although what you will notice is that Toyoshima does spend quite a lot of the opening making an attack as opposed to immediately castling his king, whereas you see Sota Fujii immediately put his king up a square, which is obviously not, one square does not make a castle, but, at least he's not on his home square. We get a pawn exchange, and then after the rook is kicked back, it actually goes to the side. So this is the first variation in the opening. We see Sota Fujii nick this pawn instead of going back, which is, a little different. Free pawn, doesn't really change a whole lot, though. The rook is just kicked back, and as you will see shortly after, he opens up his bishop to the diagonal, the rook ends up going back to his home file anyway. So not a lot has changed. It's just that Sota Fujii won one extra pawn, which is not uncommon, although usually it would be like this pawn, if they've opened their bishop's diagonal. But as you can see, Toyoshima immediately jumps on the fact that Sota Fujii has not replaced this pawn here by dropping a dangling pawn backed up by this rook, trying to make a rapid attack against these pieces here. Obviously, if this promotes, that would be a fork, a very nasty fork, so you can't allow that to happen. See if he moved his rook back because he had the time to, but usually you would drop a pawn here to kick the rook back after the pawn exchange occurred, but Sota Fujii didn't do that, which is allowing this attack. Obviously, if you place the pawn now, it would be worthless because you would just take it and promote, and that would be a fork. So somehow Sota Fujii has to deal with this, and he does it by sacking a pawn, one of the extra pawns that he picked up. Now, yes, you can just take this, as Toyoshima does, but what this allows is this bishop move, simultaneously getting the bishop out of the way of this fork and hitting the rook at the same time, now that the rook has taken this pawn. And of course, if Toyoshima didn't take the pawn, well, that just cuts the rook's vision off from this pawn, so this pawn promotion doesn't do anything anymore because you can just simply take it. So takes and attacks the rook. Had to do something about that. Instead of moving it, he instead blocks it with a pawn. So Sota Fujii, now that the bishop is out of the way, is able to bring up the silver, defending this square twice. So this attack is stopped for now. Toyoshima opens up his bishop's diagonal, and the rook is kicked back. Now, I spent a while a couple minutes, when I first flicked through this game, trying to figure out why Toyoshima didn't take this pawn, because it seems, obviously it seems free. And the reason is that he saw this continuation after a bishop exchange. There's actually a bishop fork here, a rook pawn fork, and you can't save the pawn with the rook because you just lose your rook. And if you did, just escape the rook back and allow this horse promotion, that's obviously very dangerous. This silver is hanging and your king is still in the middle of the board with a horse right there. I think this is +4 or +5 for black in this position, so obviously Toyoshima did not want that. So instead he moves his rook back and allows this pawn to just sit there. It's not like it's really going anywhere at this point. And then begins to castle his king a little bit more, as does Sota Fujii. Toyoshima then brings out his bishop, not because it's doing anything here, but because he wants to develop this knight, but he doesn't want to block his own bishop in. And as you will see actually later on in this game, putting a knight on the edge of the board can run into some problems. So he wants to develop it here towards the center, towards his opponent's king, but doesn't want to keep his bishop trapped. So he moves the bishop first, making way for the knight, which then kicks the rook back. Rook coming back to the back rank, where it has lots of lateral movement. It's technically defending this knight. It's covering this hole in the camp. So just a better position for it to be in than, say, this home square for it. Okay, so finally, Toyoshima can take this pawn because this that fork is no longer a problem. If you took now, there's nothing there, and also even if this pawn wasn't here and you could drop a bishop here, this pawn is now protected, so it doesn't achieve anything. So he takes the pawn and reignites this threat. Now that this silver has moved, that would be a fork if the pawn was allowed to promote. So obviously you can't allow that. Drops a pawn to prevent this pawn from promoting for free. Bishop is attacked, but instead of simply moving it, or probably exchanging it would be the best thing to do here. Sota Fujii puts his knight on the edge of the board to raise the danger and attack his opponent's rook. I say raise the danger, they're technically worth roughly the same, but realistically in this position you prefer the rook, especially since this bishop has not a lot of places to go. So he moves the rook back, but this obviously leaves this silver undefended, so Sota Fujii simply captures it, attacking the rook in the process, and Toyoshima replies in turn by taking this free pawn and attacking the bishop. But now that this pawn has been taken, this file no longer has a pawn in it, so Sota Fujii can drop a pawn there, and so simply defends the bishop instead of moving it. Okay. Now, as I said before, putting a knight on the edge, if you've played chess before, you also know in chess you don't want to put knights on the edge. In chess, it's for a different reason. It's because a knight on the edge has far less moves in chess, so it's not acting as much, and you want to control the center. In Shogi, that's less of the reason. More of the reason is the fact that it just weakens the edge, as you will see. So Toyoshima immediately attacks the edge, because now this pawn, which would normally be defended by the lance, is no longer defended by the lance. And after this capture train, the knight is actually now pinned to this lance. Technically, it is defended by this rook that Sota Fujii put there a while back, so it's not the end of the world if you simply wanted to escape the knight. But yes, this is a pin, or you will let the knight fall, or trade off the knight for the bishop for the lance. But Sota Fujii has a better idea. If you want to try and figure out how he deals with this problem, I will give you a few seconds, or you can pause the video. If you need a hint, I'll give you a hint now. If you don't want a hint, pause now. The hint is that it involves this silver here. And hopefully you figured out his plan, making use of the fact that this rook is very close. He drops a pawn. Of course, you need to take this with the lance, otherwise you just lose the lance. He takes it and allows this silver fork. But, of course, you can simply take the bishop, which is worth about as much as the rook, getting the rook out of danger. And, of course, you can't recapture the lance yet because you need to recapture this rook. So he recaptures the rook. But instead of taking the knight, he instead creates another threat by placing a bishop in a very strong position where it has a really strong diagonal here. Plenty of support for future attacks, particularly this square, which is quite weak. But Sota Fujii, also replies in turn and drops his own major piece that he just got from that exchange. Also in a very dangerous position, pinning this gold to the king, and also attacking this undefended knight, ready to promote, which is defended by this discovered defense here from the bishop that was just dropped. And finally, this lance is picked up. Now, as I mentioned before, this square is quite weak, and this bishop is defending it. So immediately, Toyoshima drops a pawn there into this dangerous position and threatens to simply capture this lance, obviously defended by the bishop. So you can't take. If you take, you allow this bishop in, it would promote to a horse, and that would be very dangerous, especially since this knight and this silver are both undefended. So you need to do something about that. So Sota Fujii responds by dropping this lance, raising the danger. And you could move the bishop somewhere, well, not here, but you could move it, say, here, still defending this pawn, but that would relinquish control of this square up here. And to Toyoshima, this knight and preventing his opponent's rook from promoting is more important than this pawn. So instead of going this direction, he goes this direction to maintain defense of this knight. But obviously this relinquishes control of this pawn, so you can just take it now. Or you could, if this move wasn't also simultaneously an attacking move. The silver is undefended. So Sota Fujii needs to do something about that. He moves it up, making use of the rook's defense to get it out of danger, but also, start, bringing it towards the attack. And so finally, Toyoshima can take this lance. Or he could if this move wasn't also an attacking move that raises the danger. So, you can't allow this silver any closer, simply because if you allow it to get to here, where it is protected by this pawn, and attack the bishop, it's getting very dangerously close to this castle and to this pinned gold. For example, if you were to simply capture this lance with this pawn, which is now not doing anything, this move here would be very dangerous. You can't move the bishop here. You can't take. Well, you'd probably be forced to take, actually, because it's that dangerous. Instead, you would have to run over here, which is its only safe square, but that could simply be attacked. And the bishop is now trapped, so you'd probably just trade off. But once you do that, this silver is coming in, and this pinned gold is going to fall, and you already need to start defending it like this, with this promotion here, with this rook's attack being very powerful, pinning the gold to the king. I think in this position, the computer is already saying between plus 20 and plus 30, depending on the depth, for black, obviously. So very, very dangerous. You can't allow the silver to get any closer. So instead, Toyoshima defends this square with this pawn, preventing the silver from getting any closer. And so Sota Fujii is finally able to remove this pawn, saving his lance. But another pawn is dropped immediately, attacking the this under-defended knight. The lance is defending it, but obviously a knight is worth more than a pawn. You can't take it with the silver, obviously, because you would just lose the silver. And so Sota Fujii just decides, well, let's cut my losses. Knight on the edge is dead. So let's just move my silver back close to my castle, bolstering it a little bit, let the knight fall, and I'll just recapture with the lance, allowing the lance to come in on this open file here. And now, of course, this game is really going to heat up. We're going to see Sota Fujii finally seize the initiative for the first time, basically in the whole game, with all these pieces aiming towards the king, got some pins going, and everything is going to blow open. Or it would, except this is where the game ended. After seeing this move here, Masayuki Toyoshima spent 10 minutes thinking, and then resigned. Yeah, it was only a 77-move game, and in this position, Toyoshima resigned. And it was surprising to me, certainly, a very sudden end. We didn't even really make it to an end game. Both kings are still in their castles, so very odd timing there. The computer is saying, I believe, plus 20-ish, which is obviously very, very bad, especially if your opponent is Sota Fujii. But, it doesn't look that bad. You still got 2 major pieces, 3 generals. It seems like you could keep playing this and, you'd probably still end up losing. But it certainly doesn't seem completely lost yet, and certainly the computer is saying it's bad, but it's not saying any mates or anything, and it's still under that plus 20 rate mark. So, but in terms of material, it's, I believe, Toyoshima's down a couple minor pieces, I think. I mean, he's down a general, technically, but he's got a knight for his troubles, but he's also down a lance, I think. Lance. Yeah, 3 lances. So knight for a lance, and he's still down a general. So he's down a general, basically. So the material is obviously not in his favor, but still pretty sudden and very quick Resignation there, and they moved 77. And with that, the game score goes to 4-1, and that is best of 7. Sota Fujii takes the title, or retains the title rather, as the original title holder, which is pretty crazy. But this is obviously not over for these two, because during this match, actually, some of the games happened, concurrently, but also after it was the Ayo title match, the newest title, I believe, in professional shogi, introduced in, I think, 2017, which Masayuki Toyoshima actually held from last year in 2020, but Sota Fujii was the challenger, and they played each other again in another title match at the same time. And of course, that is the next title match that I am going to be covering. So look forward to more monotonous openings, but also some fantastic shogi from these two in future. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and that concludes the Oui Title Match 2021. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.